Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
I have a feeling that this Arsenal Vision podcast is going to have the best analysis yet. How do I know? Because other people are on it. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. Okay, look, I realize that promotions aren't everybody's favorite part of a podcast, and I fully appreciate that, and I recognize that you're here for the content, but a lot of you have been kind enough to sign up for The Athletic with the promotion we've been running, theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision, and what I've been saying along the way is if you do that, it helps the pod because it helps us secure some great guests that only make the pod better. And we had Amy Lawrence on already, which was awesome. Well, now we've got two guests. James, who you know as Gunner Blog, Jame McNicholas will be on. And before that, Michael Cox, who you know from his Twitter handle, Zonal Marking, and from the website zonalmarking.net, who now writes for The Athletic, and did a really interesting article about the derby and Lacazette's role in that, and just sort of Emery's tactics generally. He's on as well. So, look, I get it. The promotional stuff isn't always the most fun, but the nice thing is that we get to put out an even better podcast, and you get to hear Michael Cox and James on this pod, as well as Clive and Paul. We can't fix everything, so they're coming up as well. So really a bumper podcast to help kick the rust off of the Premier League and the interlull wrapping up, and now we can get back to the real football. So I'm very, very excited about that, and I just want to say thank you. And if you do want to sign up for The Athletic at theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision, you do get a free month to try it out, see if you like it, and then the whole thing is half off after that. I mean, $250, I think is what it comes out to a month. So we really do appreciate it. It does help us. And as you're seeing on this podcast, it does help us secure guests that I think make the pod better. So hopefully a win for everybody. With that out of the way, a little more housekeeping. Over on Patreon, we're doing something called Project 36. There's a predictor going around, and it expires tonight at midnight UK time. So if you're a patron and you want to go fill that out, you can find it on Patreon or in the Discord. We're going to give away a shirt to the person who's most accurate with that prediction, and then do a podcast using the data from that to see what people expect from the run of the next 12 games. Because the next 12 games, pretty interesting run. We've got a good opportunity to pick up a lot of points, and it gets harder from there. So hopefully we will do that. I think that's just about enough waffle from me. I just want to say we've missed you. We really appreciate you, and we're excited to come back and have a lot more podcasts coming up in the future. We've got plenty of stuff planned. So hopefully you'll stick with us, and that this is a good way to get back into the swing of things. So first Michael Cox, then Jame McNicholas, then Clive and Paul. It's all on tap. We'll take a quick break and come back with Michael after this. All right, now into the real business of actually doing the podcast. And first up is Michael Cox. You know him on Twitter at zonal_marking, and from his phenomenal writing about tactics and football generally. You can, of course, find him on The Athletic, as mentioned, and I am thrilled to have him here now. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Elliot.
Yeah, good to chat with you. So the article that got me really excited to have you on the pod, which could have really been any article you've written in the past several years, but in this case was the one about Lacazette's role in the North London derby and his attempt to sort of play false nine, connect the midfield to the attack, and sort of ape the Firmino role. And I think one thing that Arsenal fans are really curious about is how the Aubameyang, Lacazette, Pepe front three is going to function, if it can function as a trio, and connect to the midfield, who will play provider. So maybe you could start by just sort of recapping some of the things you discussed in that article, concerns you might have about Lacazette trying to play more of that Firmino false nine role.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting setup from Emery. It was obviously the first time he's played those three you mentioned together as the front three. But then he had a really kind of flat, quite defensive, quite unadventurous midfield, which isn't to say they didn't play well. You know, I think Guendouzi obviously was excellent and got that great assist for Aubameyang's goal. But when I saw the team sheet, I thought, you know, who's going to be connecting those two trios, really? I mean, there was no Ozil. Ceballos came on later. Mkhitaryan had a go when he came on for Lacazette. Obviously, he's no longer a factor. But I just think when you play that kind of system, you need either your outside midfielders or one of your forwards to kind of drop between the lines or almost become a temporary number 10. And I think the way Arsenal were looking to do it, having looked, you know, watched the game twice, went back and just watched Lacazette specifically, it seemed to be the idea was Lacazette would drop in, become a number 10, be that kind of Firmino player. So, as always, you get a little bit of stick in the comments section. People saying he shouldn't, why he's trying to say he should play like Firmino. And I wasn't saying really that he should. It was more that I think that's what he was trying to do. But while he had the right idea, and I thought he received the ball in good positions, which can be the most difficult thing when you play that role, I thought his actual passing was, constantly overhit passes quite badly towards Aubameyang and Pepe. So I thought it was an interesting development, but I would say not a particularly successful experiment with that system.
Yeah, I think people are always going to be defensive of their players, as we know, #tribalism. But what he does well is I think he presses well. He drops into midfield to help defensively. I think he can hold the ball up reasonably well. I tend to agree with you that his distribution isn't his best quality. And, we saw with the goal he scored in the game, he is a penalty box number 9. He's not a false 9. He is really good in the box. But one of the issues that also came from this game is that Aubameyang and Pepe sort of regularly had chalk on their boots, so to speak. They were really out wide. So do you think part of getting this trio to work, if they're all going to play together, is closing those distances and having them closer to one another? And how do you think Emery can try to accomplish that, if you think that's important?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it probably is preferable if they do play in that manner. Especially with the way that you weren't going to get any width or any real thrust from midfield runs going in behind the forward three. So I think they had to cover a lot of width. I'm kind of unconvinced by the idea of Aubameyang and Lacazette regularly playing in the same team, which might sound strange because one, they're both clearly very good players, and two, they get on off the pitch seemingly very well. But Aubameyang's pretty clear in saying that he wants to play up front. He thinks that's his best position. Lacazette, I think unquestionably his best position is up front, and of course was, I think I'm right in saying, Arsenal's player of the season last year. But I've never been particularly convinced by Arsenal overall when those two have played together as a front two. I think when Emery's played a diamond, or even the 3-4-1-2, just the rest of the team either lacks creativity or lacks width, or it just doesn't quite feel right. And I do think this is a bit of a puzzle for Emery about how to accommodate the two of them. I haven't been convinced that he's really got any ideas on how to solve that personally.
Well, it's sort of a catch-22 because I agree Aubameyang wants to play through the middle, but you get the sense that he wants to play with Lacazette. They have this bromance, this relationship, and there was some social media tomfoolery where someone asked the question why Lacazette didn't start against Liverpool, and he said, good question, and I think Aubameyang liked the post or something like that. They clearly have each other's back and sort of want to play together, but it would seem that runs contrary to Aubameyang's desire to play through the middle. You mentioned the back three. It's a much loathed formation in the Arsenal diaspora at the moment just because of how dire it was towards the tail end of last season, but it can be a very attacking formation, and I wonder when Bellerin and Tierney are involved, if they're providing the width, could a 3-4-3 let those three forwards concentrate more on being in and around, as they say, in and around the box, as opposed to providing the natural width? Do you think a back three with wing backs, especially as talented as those two coming back, could unlock better spacing and utilization of those three together?
Yeah, possibly. I think it's certainly an option, and I agree that Arsenal will end up with, hopefully in about a month or two, we'll end up with better attacking options from fullback or wingback than they've currently got at the moment. I don't think there's any question about that. I guess you have to look in centre of defence, where Arsenal are not particularly well stocked for talent, albeit they do now have a player in David Luiz who has played successfully as a sweeper in a back three. I certainly think it's an option. I'm not sure how you would necessarily accommodate Pepe in that system, which I don't think is a huge issue. I don't think he's the kind of player who has the status or the reputation at the moment that he has to be playing every week, but obviously having spent quite a lot of money on him, and I think brought him in to solve a genuine need, which was, a proper winger or a proper wide player who can score goals. You wouldn't want to turn to a system that he's slightly struggling to get in. So I think Emery, as always, is going to experiment with systems and formations over the coming weeks. But even now, I'm not entirely sure what the best solution is. I'd suggest, as as with many Arsenal fans, I suspect, Ceballos is a more creative and more forward-thinking midfielder than any of the three who played against Tottenham. And you have to think after, another disappointing Xhaka performance that Emery must be looking at playing Torreira, Ceballos and Guendouzi, which personally, I know there's no defined holding midfielder in there, but I think that is a three that can work in terms of the tenacity and the work rate and the ball winning skills that you need.
Yeah, I mean, I have the slight suspicion that the seas will have risen above ground level and Xhaka will still be getting picked by Emery to start in central midfield, but I certainly agree with you that you would think that would be an area he could move away from. You mentioned Guendouzi having a great game in the derby, and he's a player that a lot of people were on really quickly, Arsenal supporters, and embraced him and thought very highly of him. Others not really sure what to make of him and thought some of the praise was over the top and a little too early. Obviously, starring in the derby helps, but I'm curious, do you have a feel for the kind of player he will develop into and where his role should be? I mean, he's looked good at the base of midfield, but he had a wonderful assist stepping into a more advanced midfield role late in the derby. Do you have a sense of what kind of player he might be developing into?
To be honest, no. I must be completely honest and say when he played last season, I wasn't particularly convinced by him. I thought he looked decent enough, but I wasn't blown away. But I think a couple of times this season, I think he actually showed some good touches in the first half away at Liverpool, was it? I thought he had a good first half and was excellent in this game. So, I must say I struggled to place him, really. I kind of thought his best position was maybe as one of the two in holding midfield. But so far this season, I think he's shown a little bit more in terms of being able to get past the press and being able to carry the ball. And certainly the assist to Aubameyang was, I just thought a really strange pass. Obviously a fantastic pass, but it didn't look like the angle was on. It had to be absolutely right. Maybe in his second season he'll show a little bit more going forward. But I think it's clear that, Emery's got quite a lot of options in central midfield, actually. I mean, not necessarily, top class players, all of them. Guendouzi's still developing and Xhaka, I think everyone's got concerns about. But I think they are all different types of players, Xhaka, Guendouzi, Torreira and Ceballos. And for a manager who loves experimenting and chopping and changing in terms of systems, you think that's probably a pretty good situation for him, albeit those of us who are concerned that he chops and changes too much, might think that's a little bit of a bad thing as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing, you mentioned the pass from Guendouzi to Aubameyang, and the run really makes the pass, as they say. It's a brilliant run from Aubameyang, but what almost impresses me more is Guendouzi gets the ball a little deeper in midfield, and he sees that he's got room to split two midfielders and drive beyond them. And he drives beyond them out of trouble. And then instead of doing what so many of the midfielders under Emery have done, which is just give it to the fullback, give it to Kolasinac, he looks up, he squares his body, he sees that there's an angle, and he makes the pass. And I think Xhaka has defaulted to spraying the ball out wide a lot. We've had a lot of static midfielders since Santi Cazorla who haven't been able to sort of step through those tight spaces and create openings for those passing angles. I think Ceballos can do that. I think Joe Willock can do that to some extent. I think even Torreira has a little of that. And so now there are slightly more mobile, athletic options in midfield. What's still unclear is who that connector is going to be. And that raises the specter of Mesut Ozil. Such a talented player, but really hard to say where his head is at right now with what he went through again this summer and where his physical level is, having not played much. He had a good preseason. For observers of Arsenal's preseason, he looked great, but we haven't seen him in the regular season, in the Premier League season. So I'm curious, and obviously you'd have no way of knowing, but if you had to guess, do you think that there is a role for Mesut Ozil in this team and that finding that role for him could really be the key to unlocking the connection between the lines?
Yeah, I mean, if Emery wants to play that system, the 4-3-3, I think Lacazette's obviously got to play, Aubameyang's got to play. And I would think that the natural role really for Ozil would be playing on the right of the front three, where, hopefully he'll have Bellerin overlapping him soon, so there'd be width provided down that side. And Ozil would be in that kind of inside right position that I think he really likes and has played so many great assists from that position towards players who would be playing in Aubameyang's kind of role. So I'd like to think there's still a role for him. I mean, as you say, we don't really know what his personal situation is. And I've never quite got my head around his relationship with Emery. I'm not sure whether that's Emery doesn't like him personally or doesn't like his application or doesn't like the tactical role that he plays. But I mean, it seems a bit of a. I mean, I thought in that game towards the end against Tottenham, I mean, Ozil was just sitting on the bench and Mkhitaryan was coming on and running into traffic, and it just felt like such a waste that Ozil was an unused substitute. Like I say, we don't know the reasons, but I thought Arsenal were crying out for a player in that mould, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. We were joking on another podcast that it's starting to feel like, and actually James, Gunnerblog, coming up later in this pod, talks a little bit about how Arsenal sold Iwobi, got rid of Nacho Monreal, loaned out Mkhitaryan. It feels like they're removing all of Emery's preferred options to sort of corral him into picking the players that they think need to be on the pitch. And I wonder if that will lead to more playing time for Ozil himself. That gives us an opportunity to sort of transition to Emery a little bit. And I'm curious to get your sense. I mean, as someone who writes about tactics a lot and likes interesting tactical concepts, Emery changes enough to keep you busy. Do you like that Emery is a pragmatist, that he changes a lot? Do you worry that maybe the failure to implement a first choice system is holding the team back? Where do you stand on his performance at Arsenal so far and his decision to sort of constantly change it up?
I mean, I think he is naturally very pragmatic, and it kind of made me laugh at the start last season when he talked about how, he wanted to play good attacking football and possession football. And I think broadly, if you're a top team, you have to attack because you have to win a lot of games, and you generally end up with more of the ball. But I don't think that is remotely a factor in Emery's kind of thinking. I kind of have some sympathy for him last season because I think there was some injuries and some selection problems at certain times that meant he kind of had to change system. But towards the end of the season, I became quite frustrated with. I just thought there were some bad decisions. I mean, I remember there was that Monday night game away at Watford that I was covering, and of course Arsenal basically won the game almost by default by being gifted a goal and being, Troy Deeney having a crazy moment and getting a red card in the first 5-10 minutes. But then from there, you kind of just thought, okay, this is a game where Arsenal 1-0 up, one man up, they can just kind of fall back on their natural style and they should see the game out well. But they didn't really have a natural style. And it ended up with Emery switching to a back three and then back to a back four, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember. But he basically changed to one system, then changed away straight away when it wasn't working. And I thought that kind of just, showed what Arsenal were lacking. And it just seems such a contrast from obviously the previous 20 years when they had such a defined system to fall back on. And of course, their weakness at that point was, I think they were tactically naive a lot of the time. But it does seem like, as is often the case when you have one manager replacing another, it sometimes feels like Arsenal have gone from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, it certainly does. I think you could see where some of the pragmatism and tinkering was effective in big games where Arsenal were not as easily exposed, with the exception certainly of Liverpool last season and City away where a lot of people were exposed. But then you saw the shortcomings of that approach against some of the smaller teams where we really struggled to impose our football on those teams and rack up the goals and get 3 points instead of 1 or 0 in some cases. So it'll be interesting to see if he can find a system now, because he's been given a lot of attacking talent, attacking fullbacks that'll be coming back into the side, more athletic, agile, attack-minded midfielders, and the team looks set to play that kind of football. As Arsenal fans, we look at Chelsea and United and even Spurs to some extent and see a lot of flaws there, and I think we presume that this squad should be finishing in the top 4, and that if Emery fails to do that, that it is a real failure. And I'm curious, for you as someone who isn't observing as an Arsenal supporter, do you see Arsenal in that way? Do you see Arsenal's team as being clearly one of the 4 best and should be finishing top 4 given the challenges facing teams specifically like Chelsea and United?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. And I also would view it in... I'd come to a similar conclusion from a different perspective, which is that I know Emery has not yet convinced his manager of Arsenal, but he does have a track record elsewhere of basically getting the job done. And winning lots of Europa Leagues, and basically finishing inside the top 4. And you compare that with Solskjaer and Lampard, who are managers really with no track record at this level. I think the combination of the squad, as you mentioned, and the manager means that, Arsenal should be. I mean, to be honest, before this, in the summer I had them finishing 4th, and then after the transfer business, which I think they did pretty well with, and having watched Tottenham and been unconvinced by them and some kind of murmurings of unhappiness, I've actually, changed, and I think Arsenal should finish third. So if they get lower than that and finish fourth, no problem. But I think if they have a second year outside the Champions League places, then there will be questions, because it's a funny top six at the moment where there's two who are miles clear, and then United and Chelsea, who I think are both significantly weaker than they were 2 years ago. So yeah, I think it's really important for Emery that he finishes in the top four, and also because if it gets to February or March or April and Arsenal are looking on course to finish in the top four, there won't be such a pressure on the Europa League, because obviously Arsenal last couple of seasons must have played about nearly 30 games combined in the Europa League exclusively to try and get back into the Champions League.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think doing without that pressure should be beneficial.
Well, we'll get a look pretty soon at how he tries to rotate the squad, because last season he was really trying to, I think, build a camaraderie and a chemistry and an understanding within the squad, and used a lot of first-team players in the Europa League group stage. It will be interesting to see how he does with the Europa League group stage this season. So as a last question, you mentioned Pepe earlier. I just wanted to sort of pick your brain about that player, whether you watched him much in Ligue 1 and what you think so far of his arrival. Very direct, obviously nearly impossible to live with off the dribble. Seems like it was between him and Zaha, and I'm personally thrilled that we went with him. But do you have any sort of early returns on his Arsenal debut and what you expect from him?
No, I mean, I must say I saw a lot of him, but only in highlight form, to be honest. I can't remember watching many full matches of him, and I think sometimes that can paint a false impression of wingers in particular. I mean, all players, but particularly wingers. I mean, my views so far are probably, pretty in sync with most Arsenal supporters, which is that he's been extremely dangerous and extremely promising. But the end product at times has been not just wayward, but slightly comically bad. But certainly that doesn't seem to have been a theme of his previous career. And like I say, a few people thought, Arsenal are buying an attacking player when they need to strengthen elsewhere. And I kind of get that, but I thought Arsenal lacked goals from, aside from the front two last year. And, when I think back to the best Arsenal sides that I've seen, albeit in a different system, it was always Overmars or Pires or Ljungberg. Arsenal kind of defined by wide players who could score goals, and I do think that they lack that. So I'm pretty positive about the season he should have coming up. But like with every Arsenal attacker, it comes back to the question of the system, and I guess we're still waiting to see precisely what Emery wants to do there.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no question that Emery's been handed the tools to craft an effective attack, so I think there's a lot of pressure on him to do that. Football will have you tearing your hair out, because last season we had Iwobi playing a lot, a very technically secure, competent, connecting player who could carry the ball into the final third, not particularly dynamic or exciting, didn't have a shot on him, didn't have a great final ball on him. Now we have this extravagant, dynamic, athletic, dribbly, dangerous winger who doesn't have a final ball or a good shot on him, at least yet. So from one extreme to the other, but hopefully he finds it. I think we should leave it there. Just as a very, very last quick thing, Michael, enjoying your early time at the Athletic so far?
Yeah, I am. It's been really exciting to be part of, and I've got to do some different stuff. So the article I did at the weekend was something completely different. I went to a first qualifying round of the FA Cup, which is semi-professional level, a game between sides who are essentially in the 8th and 9th division. And I spent a few days with the home team looking at their preparations and their tactics, and got in on their set piece plans and what they were looking to do in open play and how they scouted the opposition, and wrote about how it all came together on match day. So that was something I wouldn't have done before, and that's what I think they're trying to do different stuff that you don't find elsewhere. And hopefully if people have signed up, they're enjoying it. Yeah,
certainly. I know I am. And your rundown of the top tactical teams of the 2010s is fun as well. So look for more a continuing series there. In any event, we'll let you go, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, great chat. We'll hope we get to do it again. You can follow Michael on Twitter at @zonal_marking and read him at The Athletic. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we're going to take a break and do what they say. The podcast goes from strength to strength because Jame McNicholas, as you know, Gunner Blog, will be up after the break. Stay with us. More after this. Okay, it's time to tell you about The Athletic, the new home of football writing and a world-class sports website. You can get The Athletic for half off and a month trial right now if you go to theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision. You'll help the pod, and of course you'll help The Athletic too, but that's a good thing because you will be at the new home of football getting world-class writing and the best coverage of Arsenal from writers like Amy Lawrence, whom we love, has been on the pod, David Ornstein, Jame McNicholas, also known as Gunnerblog, myself, but don't let that hold you back. The coverage of sports is unrivaled, and there's no advertising to get in the way, no clickbait. They're not chasing ad revenue. They're just trying to write great in-depth articles. They've broken some incredible news. They've had some incredible interviews. Loved the article about the Eddie Nketiah loan to Leeds and how that came about. So there's a lot to like there. Try it out. It's a month free. And then if you stick with it, it's $2.50 a month. That's it. So you can go to theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision and try it now. See what all the buzz is about. Go sign up now, theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision. Okay, we're back. And as mentioned, Jame McNicholas, you know him as Gunnerblog, and one half of the amazing Arscast Extra is here. We are thrilled to have him. Hello, James.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So just real quick, Big J journalist James now. You are in the fold of The Athletic, and I'm just curious, before we actually get into the article you're writing and Anon, how are you liking it?
It's been fun so far. I mean, being a big grown-up journalist does have its complications. I have to wear, shoes with laces
pants
now and things like that. Yeah, I have to wear pants. It's not acceptable for me to interview people in my dressing gown anymore, which is a real shame. But yeah, it's good. And it's great that you've got this relationship, which finally enables you to get me on a podcast. Who would ever have thought? What a coup.
What a coup for me. Yeah,
I'm so podcast shy generally.
Yes, I am a podcast whore, as everybody knows. But yes, I have to say how great it is for you that you can help me by being on the podcast. Thank you for that. Yeah,
it's my pleasure. It's a long-time listener. Great to be here.
First-time caller. Okay. Well, now that we got all the pleasantries out of the way, you wrote a great article, as you are wont to do. And this one was about Reiss Nelson and the opportunity he has this season. And within that article, I think is sort of an interesting perspective on the club steering Emery maybe towards the decision-making from a lineup standpoint that they may prefer. There's some speculation inherent there, but maybe we can just talk about the club literally selling all of the left-wing options out from under him, paving the way for Reiss Nelson, and your perspective on how that's shaken out.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? I mean, if you'd said to me last season that neither Alex Iwobi nor Emery Mkhitaryan would be here, for the majority of this campaign, I don't know if I would have believed it. I mean, there was a time last season where it seemed that Emery was really pretty reliant on those guys, and they were sort of fundamental to a lot of his tactical approach, certainly in the first half of the campaign. And, they were guys that he used. And if you talked about what is an Unai Emery wide player, their names would have been sort of the archetype, really, in terms of what they were the closest thing we had to what we thought he might want. And now they're both gone. So that has opened the way for Reiss Nelson. But like you say, it's kind of forcibly put upon Unai Emery. And I think it's really interesting, actually, the three senior players who've departed in the last stage of the transfer window, Monreal, Iwobi, Mkhitaryan, they're all guys I think we know Unai Emery likes, or certainly guys that he's picked pretty regularly. And I think that's the new system in action, isn't it? That's the new hierarchy. That's the fact that some of these decisions are being made above his head. And I did speak to someone this week who said there was a little bit of tension around the Monreal situation in terms of Emery wanting to hold on to him and make sure he played in that derby, but the club wanted to get the deal done and make sure it was financially secure, and they got what little cash they did for him and got him off the books. So it is interesting, and I think I don't know if it goes so far as to say it weakens his power base, but I think it definitely shows there's a strategic level of thinking that goes above Unai Emery and maybe beyond Unai Emery.
Yeah, I have this vision. Have you seen those sort of dry erase board images that are going around the internet where it's like his lineup written in, and then under each starter there's two names of like the next guy that would be up to come in and then the next guy beneath that. I have this image of like Raul sneaking in there at night and just erasing the name above until it's just the names of the guys he wants to start. Because I think you could also make the argument that like this also sort of forces him to use the Pepe, Aubameyang, Lacazette front three more. And you know, it's cynical to say it, but he can't make lineup decisions that management doesn't prefer if he doesn't have any other lineups that he can use. So then with that in mind, I mean, one of the criticisms I had for Emery last season, and as you know, I'm not a particularly critical individual by nature, but
sure.
my criticism, one of them was the way he used the squad in the group stages of the Europa League, we have a 12-game run that we are calling hashtag Project 36 around here, and it's got a lot of winnable games, but interspersed there is the Europa League. So I'm curious, do you think that this time around, with Emery now having been in the job a little longer, been able to impart whatever system he's trying to impart on these players will be more willing to trust the likes of Nelson in particular, Martinelli, Saka, certainly Willock, he's willing to trust already. I mean, how do you see him opting to rotate once the European fixtures come back?
It will be really interesting because last season he opted primarily for seniority. I think in some cases against advice he was receiving from the performance team, who felt that rotation would be beneficial. Unai Emery clearly felt that he needed to establish a culture, and so we're sort of looking for some of these senior guys, taking them on trips that they weren't always happy to be on. I think he needs to rotate more this year. I mean, we talk about young players getting a chance, but it's going to be by necessity partly, isn't it? I mean, suddenly it feels like we haven't got the deepest squad in certain areas, and we're going to need people like Nelson, Martinelli, Willock to step up. I have some concerns. For example, we go to Germany next week, and people are expecting us to play a really understrength side. I fear that we could get beat if we do that. I mean, we're not playing against some jokers.
Does that matter?
Well, I guess it depends on your perspective in the competition. I mean, it may not matter ultimately. We may be able to get out of the group by hook or by crook. But I think it's important that we do get out of the group, doesn't it? I mean, I think it would be... It remains an important thing that we progress in this competition, even if I think we probably will... I hesitate to say it, but I think we have a better chance of making the top four this year than we did certainly last season. I still think we need to get out of that group. I still think that it's important that we need to try and progress into the later stage of that competition. But so I think it will be about balance. I think we will see, Nelson, we will see Willock, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were one or two senior players in there. What I think is important is that he doesn't necessarily take, a guy who could be staying at home, give him 20 minutes run out at the end of the game. I think he needs to, when he rests somebody, rest them properly and not necessarily make them part of that travelling group.
Yeah, the one good thing, I guess, is if you need to bring some of the really good players and leave them on the bench, is that we're not flying to Eastern Europe. We're not flying to Asia. Thankfully, it's United that got that kind of group this year. So, if you have to fly the 45 minutes to Germany or whatever it winds up being, I apologize for my lack of knowledge about flight times from the UK to Western Europe, but
it's a bit longer than that, but not by much.
I mean, it's just like people who don't realize how big Texas is, right?
Sure.
It's two sides of the same coin. More of the story is I think that those trips are at least a little less harmful. And my point about does it matter if we were to lose in Germany is not that I don't want to get out of the group, but more that there's very, very few scenarios I could see, even with weakened sides, where we don't win all of our home fixtures, draw one more, and you're out of the group with 10 points, I'm guessing. So, it's fair. Such an easy path. And look, League Cup is coming back as well. I mean, surely we would see a more rotated squad for that. He got a little unlucky last season with the Spurs tie coming up so early in League Cup and having to make some tough decisions there. But overall, I mean, with respect to Nelson, we've seen a little of him in the Premier League already. Do you have an expectation that he could kick on and become a contributing part of the first team this season?
I think so. I mean, I do think that left wing spot is quite interesting, because we kind of assume that Emery's going to go with the front three fairly regularly, or at least we're hoping that. I think as a lot of fans are hoping that, but I'm not convinced it'll be that consistent. When I look at Unai Emery and I look at that and I look at what it does to the shape of our team, I wonder if he's just fundamentally a bit more conservative than that in his approach. And I do wonder if he likes to include someone who you'd count as more of a playmaker in that front three. I mean, people will scoff at the idea that Alex Iwobi was a playmaker, but, someone who has a bit more of a creative bent. And Nelson does fit that profile. Although I have to say, I recently had the opportunity to read Per Mertesacker's book, which he wrote with Raphael Honigstein, and it's being translated into English, I think, and it will be out very soon in English. But he talks about it, the World Cup campaign, where Germany's successful, where Mesut Ozil was the guy stationed on that left wing and played there throughout the tournament until the final, when he switched into number 10 during the final and did a pretty decent job of it. So, Unai Emery could be faced with a choice between a very inexperienced player in Reiss Nelson at the beginning of his career and another in Mesut Ozil, who is right at the outset of his. But he's another player for whom the Europa League sounds crazy to say it of our highest paid player, but that's one of his premium opportunities to actually play a game. Yeah,
it's a bizarre situation. By the way, real quick, love the humble brag that you had early access to Mertesacker's book in English before it's been released. Enjoyed that. So we'll get that out there. Well, it is an interesting one. Let's talk about Ozil for a second, because I do think that the challenge, if he wants to play a flat three in midfield like he did against Spurs, is connecting the midfield to the attack. And there's a few ways you could do that. He could go back to a 3-4-3 to get width from wingbacks instead of wide forwards, and that would get the front three a little closer together. He could press a little higher up the pitch like he did second half in the derby, but he could pick 2 from 3 and let Ozil float between the lines, between the attacking and midfield line as a connector. Is there a way back for Mesut Ozil? I mean, there's a part of me that cynically thinks there was some link with him and Major League Soccer, MLS, and while you might say the window is closed, I don't think that applies to MLS. So, I mean, is it a possibility that this is a player who is in the departure lounge and we just don't know it yet?
I don't think so. I have to say, I don't think Mesut Ozil is inclined to leave Arsenal or to leave London at this point. And I have a certain degree of sympathy with that. I mean, he's on a fantastic contract. He's very happy. He was very happy.
That was going to be my next point. Yeah. Knife attack notwithstanding, yeah.
Knife attack notwithstanding. But assuming that he has got over that, and let's not underestimate, that is a pretty significant trauma, I think he will be here. I think he will play games as well, but I think they'll be pretty selective games, and they'll be in the cup competitions or home games in the Premier League. I can see him starting. The trouble with Ozil is he's such an ineffective sub that if he's not in the starting 11, he might as well not be in the squad to a certain extent. Unai Emery very rarely uses him off the bench. When he does use him off the bench, he doesn't make a massive impact. So it's kind of start or bust for him. I don't think he's going to go anywhere, I would say, until the very end of his contract. So I'm not anticipating something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, he's one of those players that I think the theoretical capabilities and qualities he has that we believe he could bring to the squad and what he actually maybe brings to the squad at this stage of his career, there might be quite a delta between those two. Is that fair to say?
I think so, definitely. And I think that, when we talk about Mesut Ozil, I think we do have in our mind a version of Mesut Ozil that was at the very least a few years ago, at very least a couple of years ago. Do you know what I mean? And it's weird how we're so worried about certain players sort of going over the hill in terms of age. We're so anxious that any minute Aubameyang could suddenly dip because he's 30. And with Ozil, we don't quite apply the same thing. And I think maybe because he hasn't got that explosive athleticism, we think it's not going to be such an issue. But when you look at his career, when you step back, when you look at the time that he played for Real Madrid and the age he was then, the age when he won the World Cup, you would have to say his prime, his peak is some time ago. So I think, while I still think he has a contribution to make, I think expect him to reach the levels that he has previously is probably a little bit unrealistic at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care if you're an 18-year-old player just finding your way or you're Mesut Ozil at the tail end of your prime. When you play so little competitive football over a long stretch of time, I think it's difficult to maintain a high level. I mean, even Aaron Ramsey, who we all were really disappointed to see go, one of the hallmarks of Ramsey's Arsenal career was that it took him a few games run in the side to really start to hit his peak of performance, and then injury would have him out. If Ozil's going to be just occasionally used by Emery, I struggle to see him really getting to the best of his game, and then you wonder where we use him at all.
Yeah, well, think about it. I mean, Mesut Ozil's game is what? It's based primarily around his ability to find players. So it's based on relationships. It's based on understanding, the runs of your teammates, on that intuition. And I think if you're not playing regularly, maybe that doesn't develop. Yeah. We're hoping that he's kind of going to be able to find Aubameyang, find Pepe. But if he doesn't get the opportunity, then it does bring that into question. It's clearly a bit of an unhappy marriage, I think, between Emery and Ozil. And, there's every chance Ozil outlasts Emery. If we don't make the top 4 this season, I think there's a really significant chance that Ozil will be here and Emery won't. But for the time they're here together, it always feels a little bit awkward. And when I look at the various shapes for this team, I find myself putting Ozil sort of into a box that he's not necessarily happy in. So maybe it is the left wing or playing on the right hand side as an inside forward. I don't foresee too many shapes where I see him given the freedom, the number 10 role that he would desire. Because even when I think of trying to inject more creativity or more links between midfield and attack, I tend to think more of a Ceballos, doing it as an 8 breaking forward, or Joe Willock, someone who's got that energy to go box to box, than I do in terms of deploying a proper, true, old school playmaker.
Yeah, and I think that fits the system. I'm just not sure those players are as effective at that as we maybe would like to believe they are. They're both wonderful players, but I think we've seen connectivity issues with them. And I mean, Willock played more advanced against Newcastle, and I thought that was his lesser performance, where he struggled with that role a little. So I don't know. I mean, the Ozil thing will work itself out one way or the other. And it is a shame. It feels like a million years ago, but he was really good in preseason. He looked energized and interested in what was going on, and I thought he looked sharp. So it's just a shame. I think that attack obviously put a stop to things in terms of his reintegration into the side, and I think that's unfortunate for the player and unfortunate for the team. Just on Joe Willock, sorry, I was just going to say, that's one of the things about Unai Emery, is that when he does play what we might call a 10 or somebody off the striker, often he's not even looking for them to be the playmaker. Their role is, it goes right back to his first ever league game against Man City, where he played Aaron Ramsey in that kind of role. It's an instigator of a press, or almost someone to just close down the defenders or harry them, or sort of work defensively as much as anything. I just don't foresee that working out between Ozil and Emery, and it is a real shame because, as you say, he did have a bit of momentum going into the season, then the rug was sort of pulled from under him. It's a great point, really, really good point actually, because if you'd say what's the position Emery has most struggled to solve, it's probably that one. He tried Ramsey as a pressing trigger at the start of last season, and it didn't really suit him. Ozil doesn't really have the energy and intensity defensively off the ball for it. He wanted Lacazette, I guess, to do it against Spurs in the derby, right, with a flat 3 and Lacazette dropping in, and he can kind of do it, but does he distribute well enough? I know Michael Cox wrote an article for The Athletic, sort of critical of that role for him. So it is a problem that he's still trying to solve, and maybe that will be Ceballos, but we'll find out. In your capacity as a world-class journalist for the New Home of Football, you corrected a story that had broken about Granit Xhaka. Give you the opportunity to do it on microphone here. I think it was said that he was going to get paternity leave, which I think everybody on this podcast is well in support of, myself especially, with a baby on the way in December, but that he was going to get paternity leave and step away from football for a bit. Looks like what you're saying makes a little more sense, that he's just going to be given some time away during the international break around then. Is that right?
Yeah, I spoke to a couple of the journalists involved. It seems there was a bit of an issue, a mistranslation. Essentially, one of the members of the current Swiss squad, I forget who, one of their strikers, has recently had the birth of a child, and so was relieved from international duty. And Granit Xhaka was asked about that, and he said, I've got another child on the way. I think something similar is going to happen with me potentially, where I'm going to miss some international games, and I think that's good, and I think that's sort of fine and shows an understanding of our other commitments outside football. But that somehow got spun into the idea that he might be stepping away from football altogether, or club football, just for a brief period. But obviously, if his wife goes on into labour on the day of a game, that might influence things, but I don't think there's any sort of plan. And I don't think there's any planned break for Granit Xhaka at all. In fact, the latest I heard is that we're speaking on Monday. We're speaking on Monday. Over the weekend, I heard that Unai Emery is still sort of regarding Granit Xhaka as the captain of Arsenal Football Club. So I don't think any fans sort of hoping. It was when I tweeted that correcting that story. So many fans responded to me, with sort of FFS or up in arms, absolutely gutted, devastated that Granit Xhaka is going to be available in October.
Well, now he's injured, right?
Yes, well, there is that. There's hope still lives. But I do feel for him because, I feel for him. I mean, I was as exasperated as anybody else, during the derby with that ridiculous foul. But he really, really is in that position now where the tide of public opinion has shifted against him. And I don't really see what he could do that could possibly swing it back in his favour, and that doesn't bode well really for the relationship between him and the fans. So I do fear for him in that regard. Yeah,
I mean, I don't think he's a clown figure in the way that Mustafi had become, and I rewatched the second half of the derby, did a rewatch pod for Patreon, and I have to admit, when you're not just focusing on the calamitous errors, the dumb fouls, he was influential and he did good things in that second half. But once again, I mean, I think there were some statistics floating around, and some people were a little bit dubious of the degree to which you can rely on these figures, but just about Arsenal leading the errors leading to goals table over the last year and a half or so. And I just wonder, for a coach, when you have a player that undermines your entire tactical plan with a moment of madness or stupidity, it has to be exasperating. And while he clearly got exasperated with Mustafi and gave up on him, it doesn't seem that he's at that level with Xhaka. If anything, he seems very dependent upon him. Do you think that there is an end of the rope with him and Xhaka, or do you feel that he will continue to be an ever-present in the midfield?
Honestly, I think a lot of it rests on Unai Emery's assessment of Lucas Torreira. I really, really do. I think
the role he's using him in is weird, and that right side of the more attacking side of the midfield.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to do there is that he kind of likes that Torreira has the capacity to close the space, that he can break forward and, close down in that way. But I agree, it's not a role that he looks particularly comfortable in or massively well suited to. I just think he's been a bit reticent to use him generally since around the winter of last year. And he seems to me like, someone who, well, listen, from the outside, I would be picking him to start. I like the intensity of his game. Mm-hmm. I like his game. I think his game's more technically secure than he gets credit for. I like that he's a competent tackler. We don't have too many of those in our team. But I do think the former Matteo Guendouzi as well, spells trouble for Granit Xhaka. I mean, he really is growing, it feels like, on a game-by-game basis. And I expect at some point in the season, as with any young player, there might be a dip. There was a dip last season, but ultimately he recovered from it. And I'm sure that will come. But, when it comes to the midfield, I kind of think that you look at Guendouzi and you probably want to try and build around that at this point. I mean, for me, he would be the starting block of any midfield construction.
Yeah. Well, let's finish with this then. I mean, look, you've reported on the moves that were made to clear the way for Nelson, maybe not being moves that Emery would have supported himself. There's a lot of reporting that he wanted Steven Nzonzi instead of Lucas Torreira.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that management is too concerned with what Emery wants from a player personnel standpoint, and that they are building a team based on a vision that they have that might be a bit independent of the coach. Which, to be fair, I think is how modern football is done, and I don't have a problem with that. But it certainly isn't a ringing endorsement. Is there, and again, this is not meant to be Emery in or Emery out, just in your sort of predictive mindset, is there a scenario where Arsenal are not in the position they should be in the league table this season, and Emery doesn't get to see out the season? And again, I'm not saying that happens. We could be in second place come New Year, and I'd be delighted. I'm only saying, do you think his situation is tenuous enough, and that with our rivals struggling, if we don't take advantage and we are, slumped down in sixth or something around the holidays, is there a scenario in your mind where they would move on from Emery as soon as during the season?
I think if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have said, no, I think Emery will get the 2 years almost irrespective. But seeing the way that the club has behaved, and when I say the club, I mean those in executive power have behaved and acted in the last few weeks and months, has changed my mind. And I think if our season was in jeopardy and our chances of Champions League qualification were in real jeopardy, I really believe they would pull the trigger on Unai Emery. And I think that is a positive thing. And I think we've all asked for accountability at this football club for a long time, for players, for managers. And I think that does exist now. And I think there is a bit of a ruthlessness emerging in the culture that I've got a lot of time for. And I think I like Unai Emery more than many Arsenal fans. I sort of sympathise with some of the problems he's encountered in his reign considerably. But we should make the top four this season. I really think that. When I look at Manchester United, when I look at Chelsea, when I look at the problems they're having, some of the growing pains they're enduring, even Spurs to an extent, I think we should make that top four. And if that is called into question, is called into risk, I think they need to do something. I don't think, we are jumping the gun here. We are not at that point or close to it. But if it came to it, I think Raul and Emery, just because they're Spanish, doesn't necessarily mean he'll never fire him. I think he would.
Fair enough. Well, look, I was in therapy for quite a while following the way you and Andrew tore each other to pieces on the post-Liverpool Arscast Extra. And then you suddenly went on holiday. So
yeah,
if you're looking for a change, if you're looking for a new place to be, I know Clive's been trying to get out of our podcast for ages. We could always set something up, but hopefully you and Andrew will mend those fences and stay together long term.
Well, listen, I'm supposed to be recording with him on a Wednesday this week. Let's see if he turns up. Hopefully, let's see him at sundown. No, I think we'll put things back together. And I apologise for any trauma inflicted upon you.
Well, as long as mommy and daddy are staying together, I'm happy. And congrats.
For your sake.
Yeah, for my sake. Well, thank you for the kids. Congrats again on the Athletic gig. I think what you're doing there is wonderful. Thanks again for coming on. We'll listen to you on the Arscast if you do indeed show up there again and read you on the Athletic. James is on Twitter at Gunnerblog. Obviously, thanks, James.
Bye-bye.
All right, we'll come back with, the usual schmoes after this. Stay with us. Okay, we want to tell you about the new home of football writing, The Athletic. And this is a company that means a lot to me. I have been honored to have the chance to write for them for the past year. And it is one of the best sports websites that I have had the pleasure of using. It gives you a chance to get totally ad-free content that isn't clickbait, that isn't chasing advertising revenue. Some of the best writers in the world are there. When it comes to Arsenal, it's the best coverage of Arsenal now. You have writers like Amy Lawrence and David Ornstein and, of course, Gunnerblog Jame McNicholas as well. The app is fantastic. If you're driving along, it will read an article to you. Just read it to you, which I love. There's podcasts and videos and articles and fantasy sports. Plus, they cover everything. They cover all sports. So if you are a fan of sports beyond just football, you're going to find world-class coverage of that too. It's great wherever you're located. Obviously, they've just attracted phenomenal writers in the UK, but there's a great stable of fantastic journalists in the US as well, covering all those sports. So, you want to support the pod and maybe give The Athletic a try? Go to theathletic.com/ArsenalVision, theathletic.com/ArsenalVision, and check it out. You'll get a month free. Your subscription's $2.50 a month, which is nothing. And when you go somewhere where you can just read an article and nothing pops up and nothing gets in your way, and you can see the community there and see the quality of the content, I think you're really going to like it. So go there now, theathletic.com/ArsenalVision to sign up for The Athletic. Okay, we're back. And now, last but certainly not, and I emphasize this, certainly least, Paul's on Twitter at Paz in My Pants. Hello, Paz.
Woohoo!
And Clive's on Twitter at ClivePFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
Hello, indeed. So, yeah, I mean, how cool is that, guys? Two fantastic guests. I mean, I know, it can be annoying when we do all this promotional stuff and promoting The Athletic, but not too shabby, right? James and Michael, pretty good stuff. I'm excited about it anyway. But so let's do this. Let's have a little fun. We'll look ahead to Watford in just a second. We're doing something over on Patreon called Project 36. And actually, you just have enough time if you get in by the end of the day today to enter the predictor, because we're giving away a shirt to the most accurate prediction. But basically, we are predicting the outcome of the next 12 fixtures. And you might say, well, why 12? Why not 20? Why not 8? Well, how do you pick that? So these 12 fixtures are a run where we've got a lot of favorable ones coming up. Really, the only really tricky games you'd say would be Leicester away and United away, although depending on how you rate us, you could say they're all tricky. But it's a crucial point in the season, because from there, things get a little bit tricky. And with the holiday program and games against City and Chelsea and Spurs away down later in the season, a tough run for the run-in, this looks like where we could accumulate a lot of points. So, Clive, I'll start with you. In terms of the pros and cons of what could go right, what could go wrong, I think one of the big things here is that over this next 12 fixtures, we probably get Holding, Bellerin, and Tierney back. So for you, looking forward, is this period of getting them back, integrating them, and hopefully amassing a lot of points really our whole league season in a nutshell?
I don't know about a whole league season.
Should we just end the league season after this 12th game?
No, I see this. I think, where's my head with this at the moment? I always say this is the points accumulation phase. Right? This is the phase where you position yourself for the key period, just pre-Christmas. So it's a challenge for clubs, particularly sort of top 6 clubs, because they have the European competitions coming in, and then they have to rotate, and then they lack a little bit of rhythm depending on travel. That Thursday, Sunday, or Wednesday, Saturday thing is a bit tough. And this is the period where consistency is everything. And for the top 2 in particular, this is the time when they might drop a few points here and there just because of the logistics of European games. And it's the same for, obviously, Manchester United, Chelsea and Spurs as well, and ourselves. So this is a test for us. And I think pre the last game against Spurs, we've got some questions to answer. And we're excited about we've got the talent to answer them. But there's probably a little bit of us wondering how they're going to be answered and how long it will take and what it will look like. And when are we going to see that game that we always seem to have once a year? A few years ago, it was a Chelsea 3-0, and then it's a Tottenham 4-2. We have that massive game that gets us all excited and we think we're going to win the European Cup, and then suddenly we come back to reality. That game is not far away. And
for me, that was the Bayern
like?
Munich preseason game, by the way.
Okay, that game is not far away. I lose my mind and predict all sorts of things. And then, but it's really interesting to see what balance we end up with. I think it's the key thing. And we could all three of us debate what that looks like. But maybe the talent differential between our better players and our worst players is not quite as big as it was last year. So the conversation, although interesting, doesn't become soul destroying, because we're still going to have talented players on the pitch. I do feel the squad is stronger, more even, more together, and with lots of potential for big improvement. So this is the period where it's accumulation, but really, towards the end of it, the excuses for not finding the right balance are getting less and less. And that's for the manager. And I think between now and November-ish, this is his time to really show what he's got.
Yeah, I think... you talked about having a game that makes you think we're going to win the European Cup. One thing that I thought was interesting, and I'm not bringing this up as a stick to beat Emery with, just something that I came across that is interesting. We've never won 3-0 or better over anyone since he's been here, in the league, I should say. So, I thought that was sort of an interesting point. I just wonder if Emery's style is conducive to crushing the opposition. Not that crushing the opposition gets you any extra points, but so just in terms of building that belief that, oh my gosh, here we come, we're on fire, we're gonna tear someone up. Under Arsene Wenger, I feel like he always knew we could drop the dumbest of points, but around the corner somewhere there was a 4 or 5-0 hammering of some minnow. Hasn't really happened for Emery yet, but with the attacking options he has now, maybe that's just around the corner. Let's look at this, Paul. A couple of things that could maybe be pitfalls, or potentially, do the opposite, help us go from strength to strength. Springboard. There you go. That's the English word I was looking for. So we've sold or loaned out Mkhitaryan. We've sold Iwobi. James spoke about this earlier in the pod, sort of what that means in terms of Nelson maybe coming in, Martinelli coming in. Xhaka maybe has a knock. Torreira maybe has a knock. So... one thing that we haven't talked about, the first 11, if there is such a thing, looks a lot stronger this season to me, but maybe the options for rotation and within the squad are a little weaker, or certainly, if not weaker, less experienced. With Europa League coming back, how tricky a balance do you think that's going to be for him? And to what extent do you worry, even slightly, that the decision to move on Nacho Monreal, Alex Iwobi, Henrik Mkhitaryan, could make this a little tougher just because of the paucity of options behind them?
Well, it always seemed a bit unreal this summer we had, where we could just go out and buy players and not worry about selling or loaning out players. We're so accustomed to the mantra that you need to sell before you buy during the summer. We were told that many, many times. And while that seems like a good discipline, there are times when you really want to buy before you sell, and I'm sure we could all come up with scenarios and examples, but sometimes you got to go and grab the best player and then work out afterwards what the pieces are that are left, and what the monies are that are left, depending on who and what else you got out the door. So when I look at the Mkhitaryan sale, there's the narrative that, hey, Raul and Edu were making decision for Emery in terms of who was available to pick, and they want him to pick young players, so they moved out Iwobi, who they could get a good price for, and Mkhitaryan in particular, as they wanted to preference our youth and to load the deck and make that choice for Emery, which may well be the primary or secondary motivation for it, but it could just be they need to balance books. And at the end of the day, you look at Mkhitaryan and you say, what are we getting for the money that we're paying him? and that's the decision there, rather than let's force Emery to play Nelson and Martinelli and whoever else. It's a very interesting concept, discussion, topic, but I guess I'm not as decided that they've forced his hand to Project Youth, as opposed to books have to be balanced and Mkhitaryan's expensive and choices had to be made, and they sat down with Emery and said, how are we going to get this done this year? You can have Pepe, but we're going to have to let some stuff go, and that may well be Iwobi and Mkhitaryan. And he said, okay, I'll take that deal. So that's kind of how I feel. That to me is what's going on with the Mkhitaryan thing. I mean, he's underwhelmed a little bit recently. It's a profile of player Emery likes. He's had Iwobi, he's had Mkhitaryan, he had Dennis Suarez, your favorite. But as a profile of player, he likes somebody who can hover in those half spaces. And I guess right now we have Pepe on one side, who's kind of a different, much more attacking kind of player, but he lives in that half space. He has Aubameyang on the other side, who's maybe not a natural in the half space, but that may be his starting position for a while. And then he's two youths, if you count in Martinelli and Nelson, and I like Martinelli, but that's another topic.
Yeah, well, considering that my question was poorly worded and possibly poorly conceived as well, I appreciate what was an extensive and thoughtful answer. Clive, let's have a little fun with this Project 36 thing. So for you, over the next 12 fixtures, given that this is probably the easiest run we have all season, putting aside the issue of fixture congestion, easy for me to say, what do you think is par? So how many points do we need to pick up for you to say, job done, where fewer than that would be not good, and more than that would be above expectation or requirement?
Okay, so in my mind, I want and hope Arsenal are best of the rest, and they finish third this season. That's what I predicted, and I hope that happens. So for that to happen, and I'm maybe not the best for this, because you know me, I literally
36
think,
points, yeah.
I literally think we can win every single game, right? But I did the predictor. I think I may have come in at 30, 31 points.
Ooh, spicy. That's pretty good.
And I was really trying to be sensible, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure where this spreadsheet's going to go, but if it goes out into the wide world, then people are going to laugh at me if I say 36. And so, and that's where we should be. I really do think that. I think the points accumulation is one thing. I have to be honest, Elliot, I'm much more interested in where we end up, selection, balance, systemically. I think this is the key
process over results, and that's totally sensible, obviously.
I really am. I think there's some new players that are coming in. They need to get to their level of fitness. For Pepe, for example, Torreira needs to get up to a level of fitness. There's obviously the fullbacks, Holding. There's so much in the to-do list before we can talk about accountability, style. It's just about what can we get done while we're still doing stuff to build the team we want to build. And going back to the previous question that Paul answered so brilliantly, I think this is a points accumulation phase, but it's also for the squad. I think it's about their hierarchy, where they're going to sit within the system, new pathways being opened up, and I do expect some things to happen in January. I really do, depending on where we are. There's room to speculate. There's room transfer-wise. There's room wages-wise.
Well, we've cleared the decks a bit, right? I mean, moving out Iwobi and moving out Mkhitaryan and moving out Nacho, it may seem like it leaves us a little threadbare, but it would feel like smart moves if it was in anticipation of doing more in January.
Yeah, maybe one or two, maybe none. But I think I read somewhere we've taken out 18 players. I mean, that is massive. My blow it up thing I've always been tweeting for the last 2-3 years. Maybe it just happened and we hadn't, we're just realising it. Particularly maybe Mkhitaryan going. We're starting to look back and say, hold a minute here. None of us really predicted Mkhitaryan and Iwobi going. So that's a significant change. Then you say to yourself, hold on, we've added in Pepe, we've brought back Nelson, we have a healthier Smith Rowe, and we've got Martinelli. So now these young players, they have a chance. There's a pathway there for them. There's plenty of games for them. Let's see where they end up. I think we've seen the best of Mkhitaryan. Whether we've seen the best of Alex Iwobi, I think we've seen the best of him, but maybe that's as high as he can get. But the gap between him falling off is getting bigger and bigger and causing more frustration. And maybe this was just he needed to go somewhere where he was viewed as a man, not a child, and he could really establish himself. And sometimes moves are good for all parties, and I think that may be one of them. And I wish him all of the very best. For absolutely, I really do. Apart from he plays against us.
Yeah.
Apart from playing against us, so we should be applauding that. He's been at the club since he was 8-9 years of age. That is a fantastic job, well done by everybody at the club.
Yeah,
right? So
I totally agree.
So we have opportunity to see how good Nelson is. We have a certain player called Mesut Ozil who doesn't mind sitting on one of the sides. We have opportunities to play one behind the front too. We are not bereft, but now the potential has to be realised with a level of expectation and pressure. And that is the final phase of building a young player. What you do under pressure when expectation is upon you. Can you deliver in the key moments? Experienced players give you comfort that they can do that. They don't always. But the young players are now having the first opportunity. Here we are, we're playing the game, we're 1-0 down away from home. We're not asking you to run around and just put tackles in. We're asking you to take the ball, make the right decision under pressure in the last third, and finish. But if they do start to do that, then of course the ceiling of the squad and the value of the squad becomes significantly higher. And a good example of that is watching young Daniel James at Manchester United, a player that was sharp, quite quick. He's got a few shots off, scored 2 or 3 goals. And his perception has changed, and it will change massively because he's delivering. Smith Rowe needs to do that when he gets healthy. Nelson, I believe, can do that when he gets healthy. Martinelli is a bit more of an unknown, but there's opportunity there. And I think that is as exciting to me as the games, the totals, etc. I really do think you said it beautifully. The process is what I'm really looking at in the next few games.
Yeah, and I would say that you will not find a finer example of erudition and articulation in avoiding a question than you have just demonstrated. So I applaud you
came close.
for that. Yes, you did, but he one-upped you. So I am going to answer the question that I posed. Look, 2 things. First of all, people say it's speculation that Martinelli or Nelson or Willock or Holding can go on and really go up a level and strengthen this team. But what I would argue is, look at our rivals in Chelsea and United. They need young players to go up a level to survive. Because unlike us, who have those players sort of in secondary roles, Rashford, Martial, Daniel James, those guys are starting for United. Tammy Abraham, Christian Pulisic, Mason Mount, those guys are starting for Chelsea. So I don't see why it's any crazier for us to expect an improvement in performance from our young players to make our squad bulletproof or certainly deeper when they're expecting that improvement just to get by. And look, people saying, oh, Clive, 31 points from 36. Come on, 30 from 30. What gives you belief we can do that? Last season, this time, Project 24, we took 22 points. Now, to Clive's point about process, we didn't take them well. We outperformed our XG, and there was a lot of hand-waving of that at the time, by me as well. We all wanted to believe the squad was going in the right direction. We were desperate for it. We wanted to ride that wave of euphoria, having not ridden one for a while. There's just no denying, though, that it did come back to bite us. So I am with Clive in saying that, yes, we can pick up that many points. We showed similar that we could do it last season, but it's more important than ever that we do it playing well and finding cohesion along the way. And so, Paul, I will pose for you the question that Clive dodged, which is, how many points is par? What, from this next 12 fixtures, these 36, our easiest run, and I will emphasize that our hardest games in this run are United away and Leicester away. Watford away this weekend, you could say, well, that's a tough one. Watford are propping up the table. They are dead last. And I don't think Quique Sanchez-Flores is exactly a mastermind coach. It's coming off an international break, so we'll have had a couple of weeks to train with those players because very few of them, well, I don't know. I'm going to say very few of them are internationals because I don't know their squad that well, but that may prove not true. But moral of the story is there's not a lot of fixtures there that really panic you. So if we're going to get top 4, this is the period where we have to consolidate. So for you, what is par?
Yeah, so 2 points per game across the season will get us to 76 points. 2 points per game in these 12 games gets us to 24. But that's not good enough. Well,
it's not, because the problem is if you only get 2 points per game on your easiest stretch, you're now saying you're going to get 2 points per game in your hardest stretch, which doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I hear you. But I'm trying to set some parameters of reality here when we're looking at it.
And I appreciate you doing that.
I think par it's not too much higher than that. It's probably around the 26-ish points mark. I think I actually got us at 27. That was what I ended up doing in my mix of it. I think 26, 27 is. I think if we do 27, we're doing pretty good. I think it's 26. It's only a little bit north of 24. I think that's kind of the range for me. It feels about right. You start doing much more than that, you're having to win away at Leicester. Not that it's not possible, but that's not the easiest fixture in the world. You got to avoid all draws. And as there was an analogy somebody came up with on the Discord about, you can look at each of these fixtures and almost every one of them put us down for a win, but that's not how it works out. And his analogy was a coin that flips 70% one side and 30% the other, and you do a bunch of coin flips. Of course, for each coin flip, you're going to pick the 70% side, but if you do 12 coin flicks, there's going to be 2 or 3 that don't hit, and that's about right for this. So we're going to have some draws. We're going to have some teething problems. We're going to have an injury or two. We're going to have a dull day. But seems to me like 27 would be a good number, and anything above that would be gravy.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's just that, like, when you start getting below 26, because, all right, say we lose at Leicester and lose at United, which I don't think that's a given. I mean, those teams aren't amazing. It's not like we can't get points against them. But that would put you down to 30.
Yep.
You now need to drop 3 more points or more if you're going to be below 26. And that's at least another loss. And now you're talking about, like, are we going to lose at Sheffield United? Are we going to lose, home to Aston Villa? Are we going to lose home to Southampton? Are we going to lose home to Brighton? Don't want to bring up bad memories
to Sheffield United, yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
But shit happens is the problem.
Of course. I'm just saying that, like...
Especially in a low-scoring sport.
Yeah, no, and of course that could happen. I'm just saying, like, once you start dipping, even though that sounds like a lot of points to pick up over this period, you start having us dropping some bad points to get us lower than that. And are we a team capable of dropping bad points? Absolutely we are. I just think if we're going to finish top 4, this period becomes so important, because if we don't, as I said to you, Paul, if we don't get the 2 point per game over this period, now you're looking at periods where we have much harder games, much more fixture congestion, the holiday period. I mean, there's a 4-game run in April where I believe it's Wolves away, Leicester home, Spurs away, Liverpool home. That's tricky. Are we going to pick up 2 points per game over that? Almost certainly not. So,
and I think in particular, a challenge with us is we're a low shooting team, or have been historically.
Yeah.
Now maybe Pepe will help change that. But if you're only getting a small number of shots off relatively, and things don't go to plan, we've just got to up our shot number and our. That's really that'll be the end of the pitch I'm looking at. These are the good months. The weather's decent. The pitches are good. We're mostly healthy, and we just got to get a bunch of shots off like we did against Tottenham, though that was a lot to do with game state. But I think if we're a very proactive attacking team, using our front 3, getting Ceballos on the pitch as much as possible and get a bunch of shots off, then I
passed it to you.
Yeah, we'll have the shot volume there. Whereas when your shot volume's low, you need a high conversion rate, and shit happens, and you have a bad game or things go against you. So that'll be the end of the pitch I'm looking at to see if we can really. That'll be the difference between a bunch of draws and a bunch of wins, I think.
Clive, do you now, it seems, want to engage on the topic, which I attempted to get you to engage in before, but for some reason I'm still
not gonna. I gave you a number about 30, 31, but really, I think it's. I'm going to go back on the process thing. I think this time last year when we had the 22 points, from 24, we was all excited. But I think during the same period, I think we may have lost our chief executive. There was a level of trying to understand the manager. I think a few months later, we then lost our chief scout. And there was a bit of a bumpier road organisationally. So the process, even though we accumulated points, like you said, Elliot, I think there were some suspicions that we maybe overachieved during that period. And there was still some internal rank fractions within the club that were causing issues with Ozil, Ramsey, etc., etc. This year, a lot of that has gone. This year, the structure and organisation is stronger. So I feel if we were to have a similar strong period, we would all feel different about it because we know a bit more about the people. We've seen how they operate. We understand more about the structure in the club and who's doing what role. And I think if you put a result on top of that, it feels completely different to what it would have done a year ago. And so at the end of it, if we do get this good points accumulation and we separate ourselves away from some of the teams which are looking quite plucky at the moment and quite inconsistent, and we get closer to the top two and we separate maybe from from fourth, fifth, sixth, etc., I think that's a massive tick, because what it will do, it will establish us directionally as going forward positively. And when they turn around and look under the covers, they will see a club that's now got the right organisation and are not afraid to take decisions. And that's all pointing towards this being the start of something rather than just a dead cat bounce post a generational manager. Do you see what I mean? And I think there's a difference to this, and this is why I'm ultra positive, as you know. But I'm almost excited because I'm fast forwarding. I'm fast forwarding to where we could be, and if we get there in shape with money in our pockets for January, and we're in good shape, and we've re-established ourselves by travelling away and winning consistently in a style that more becoming of the club and more, at least we understand it a bit more. I think that impact will be much, much, much greater than the 22-point impact from last year. And that really sees us into 2020, when we really start to solidify our ambitions. When we get to January, I'm not expecting a Denis Suarez to come in. I'm expecting something to come in who's got a plan around it. And the reason why, because we've demonstrated this summer. And if we do nothing, it's because the players that we've allowed the pathway to get into the first team have been so successful that we don't need to do anything. So I think either way, we're ready to go. Either way.
Yeah, and one thing that I haven't really considered, and I think in this season it is fair to consider it. We say 2 points per game gets you to 76 points, and that's good. 76 points could be a lot closer to second than it is to fourth. It's not unreasonable to think that Chelsea and United and maybe even Arsenal, if this is a season where 64 points is fourth, it wasn't that long ago where that was in the conversation for fourth. And given the way United and Chelsea look at the moment, and to be fair, maybe the way we've looked so far and the relative strength of the league and teams kind of beating up on each other and everybody being able to win on any given day at the moment, it may only require a high 60s point total to secure fourth. And that certainly makes what we need from this run look a little different. Paul, for me, the success of this run is going to hinge on integration of the players I mentioned earlier, on cohesion of a system, which, maybe that's not the case, but that's something that I've been banging on about for a while, so why stop now? But I think it's really, really down to managing the squad now more than ever. Europa League is back, and boy, have we missed it. We play Nottingham Forest in the League Cup at home on the 24th of September. Is the way Emery rotates and his ability to show a reliance on youngsters and really just sort of chuck the Europa League, at least in the early stages of the group, a key component to us planting our flag in the Premier League over this next 12 fixtures?
Yeah, I think so. And when we've knocked names around, he'll still have a pretty good second 11.
Hang on, can you stop for a second?
Yeah.
Clive, are you using the bathroom? Or showering?
No, I'm on mute, mate.
Oh, all right. Paul, were you doing this from the bathroom? Were you possibly going potty?
No, there's some construction outside.
Okay,
Is
no
it bad? I can move.
Just someone sounded like they had a very
room.
healthy stream going on in the background, and congratulations to them. Okay, continue. I apologize.
No, there's a bit of construction.
No.
Okay. Right. So where was I?
Rotating. Squad rotation, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you look at it, we still have a pretty much substantial second 11 here that will need minutes and time, assuming not too many injuries here. I mean, you have some pretty experienced players to fill out that second 11. And then you add in the kids, and there are some kids in that second 11, your Nelsons, Willocks, etc. Assuming we don't get a lot of injuries over the next month or two, I mean, you kind of get the best of both, where you may have, I mean, I'd love to see Ozil become a fixture establish himself based on merit as a fixture in the first 11. But if he's in and out, if Mustafi's on the bench, I like to bring these things up just to keep people in the real world. If we've got if we've got Holding coming back, if Tierney's coming in and him and Kola are rotating, etc. So you go around the lineup. The only thing we're really missing is a striker in the second 11. If we're playing Auba, Laka, and Pepe every game in the front three, but there'll probably be a bit of rotation there, or somebody playing 60 minutes versus 30, and you'll have conniptions when Lacazette is played in the Europa League when he played 30 minutes in the Premier League.
Correct,
and
yes,
I won't.
Mm-hmm. No, I won't.
And I won't. But I think that's where the line is. I actually think most of his choices are fairly reasonable and easy to play. A fairly strong Europa League team, but keeping basically your first choice 11 out of that rotation for the most part. He really shouldn't have to play very many of them when you start filling it out. And the kids won't go that deep either, because you're still going to have people like Saka, Smith Rowe, Nelson, Martinelli, Emi Martinez, Maitland-Niles, or Bellerin on the Willock. It's going to be a pretty youthful team without having to go to names that people don't know so well. Burton, who was part of our squad. I mean, John Jules might struggle to be an automatic candidate for the Europa League, but he's kind of in that next bunch just below that. I don't think we'll have to go to names we haven't seen before or haven't done before to have a still pretty healthy Europa League group stage setup. So unless I'd be pretty upset with them if we start seeing a lot of Premier League first team starters in his Europa League group games, because there's absolutely no need, and he doesn't have to play the kids in quotes.
Yeah, I'd say especially the older statesmen, right? Like Aubameyang, Lacazette. I was going to name elder statesmen in midfield, but we don't really have too many of them. I guess it would be Xhaka, but as you probably could guess, I'm fine with Xhaka starting in the Europa League. Maybe Luiz and Socrates certainly both shouldn't be starting those games. The interesting thing is this sets up perfectly. The conniption fit you talked about me having?
Yeah.
This sets up perfectly for it, because our very first Europa League game is Eintracht Frankfurt away, which is our hardest one in the group. And you could totally understand him saying, I don't want to start the group with a loss. I'll play a really strong side there and then rotate from there. Because if you pick up 3 points there, you could play kids the rest of the way and you're breezing through the group. But it sets up perfectly, because if our first Europa League game is basically our Premier League starting 11, then I can really have kittens and throw a fit, and it'll be everyone's entertainment. So, Clive, let's wrap up real quick with a look ahead to Watford. They've sacked their manager. Of course, we get to face the new manager bounce, although I don't know that Quique Sanchez-Flores is a manager that strikes the fear of God into you. Having said that, it is away. They are propping up the table. That doesn't mean they can't be dangerous. How worried are you about this fixture, and what do you expect from Arsenal?
Yeah, I always worry about his fixture, but I don't think they're the same team as they used to be. I don't have the same fear of their physicality in particular hurting us. And I think they've got a lot of issues. I think they've only got 1 point so far. So there's a lot of pressure on them. I suppose when you get a new manager, it's a live on Sky game, I think, on the Sunday, primetime TV, post international break. Maybe the extra day will be good for us to help some of our travellers settle down. But again, I think it's much more about us establishing ourselves as not a soft touch any longer. We've got to make sure, the lasting memory of the Spurs game was the tenacity and intensity and the desperation not to be beaten, which could have easily ended up in a win. I want to see that a lot more. I don't want us to go to these clubs and accept a defeat or a drop points like we've done in the past at Southampton, West Ham and Brighton. We just sort of roll in and walk out meekly. And these teams, they want to have their day against one of the top 6 clubs, and we're the favourites, and the easy ones have their day against them. Maybe Manchester United. I don't like that. I think it's very important we establish ourselves having a strong chin. You can't just knock us out. We're going to run with you, and then we're going to outplay you and take you. I think, that's really important. I think we can do that. I don't fear the physicality of Watford as I used to. I think we've got a bit more experience at both ends of the pitch, and we got second-year midfielders in the centre of midfield, where whoever's fit and available, and I think we'll take them no problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have 5.24 expected goals for. They have scored 2. They have 6.19 expected goals against. They've conceded 8. So you could say they've been running a little bit unlucky, I guess. And that's from understat.com. So that's their data. I don't know if that lines up with everyone else's. They drew away to Newcastle. They got thumped by West Ham 3-1. Worth noting, they produced 2.29 XG in that game. So, some might have been game state, trailing most of the game, gave away an early penalty. They got hammered at home by Brighton 3-0 in the opening game of the season. So
that was unexpected, really. Unexpected.
Yeah, I think losing 3-0 to Brighton anywhere is unexpected, let alone at home on opening day. So
it's quite interesting. They played the back 3 in the last game, which was quite interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this game. Obviously, none of us know how they're going to line up because Kike Flores might decide to go back to a back 4 and go 4-4-2. But
these managers have faced each other in Spain. So, it'll be interesting to see if he's got, Flores has any feel for Emery. If you want to see an interesting thread, 7 a.m. kickoff on Twitter, rewatched Valencia game. Who
against Atletico Madrid.
Atletico Madrid, yeah, when Flores was there and had some thoughts on that. So you can go look at that. We'll finish with you, Paul, just real quick. Expectations for the lineup and the result?
For the result, I mean, I can be nervous about any game, but we should beat them. I think this feels like a 3-1er incoming. We don't do 3-0. We always let them have the 1. I think it mollifies them. It's like when you're climbing over a fence into a compound, but you throw the Doberman a steak, a drugged steak. I think that's what the 1 goal in the 3-1 is. Lineup 4-3-3. Oh God, Jack Guendouzi, Sabalas, and PAL up front.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, is Xhaka hurt? I mean, do we know if he came back with a little bit of a knock? Because I understand Torreira did as well. I mean,
yeah, he does tend to be bulletproof, though. So
yeah, both in terms of the manager picking him and his physicality. All right, score prediction, Clive?
Yeah, I go for 4-1.
4-1.
I'm feeling good.
I'll say 10-0 to the Arsenal. It's just sort of how I see it. And anyway, Paul's on Twitter. Pause in my pants. Thanks, Pause. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
And look, I just want to thank everybody, as always, not just for listening and signing up on Patreon and all that, but I know a lot of you have signed up for The Athletic, but some of you are like, look, I get it. Sign up for The Athletic, like enough already. And while I appreciate that sometimes the promotional stuff can be tedious, when you get to hear Michael Cox on the pod and get to hear Jame McNicholas on the pod and get to hear Amy Lawrence on the pod, like I hope that is something that everybody's really enjoying, and we'll continue to be able to get some great guests like that and make the pod hopefully just a lot more enjoyable than ever, and not just have to hear from us constantly banging on. So, for those of you who have signed up at theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision, we appreciate it. For those of you who haven't and don't want to hear the promotion anymore, my hope is that you'll sort of just forgive us the extra promotion with the understanding that it does help us make a better pod, right? I mean, good interviews, good guests, good content. That's the whole idea. So anyway, we do love you and appreciate you for it. And over on the Patreon side, if you win the Project 36 Predictor, you get a shirt. So, if you want to join up for that, certainly can, but also just all the extra pods and stuff. And if not, we got a lot more of these to come. So everybody wins, including hopefully the Arsenal. That's most important. In any event, my name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Give us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about Tim. He'll be back next week. And we will talk to you after Arsenal 10, Watford 0.